Bruce Uli got up and said, I will handle the first shift. Thank you, Bruce. I appreciate it much. Take it away from Columbus, Ohio.
Well, it is my pleasure, Hugh, and I appreciate the opportunity very much. It's great to be with you, America. I am Bruce Uli from the ReliefFactor.com studios, originating today from Columbus, Ohio, the heartland, where it is a stormy day. The vestiges of the weather that brought deathly tornadoes to Iowa over the weekend is here, and that's somewhat fitting because the storm clouds are gathered all around our world today as the reports are still extremely depressing from Ukraine, where Russia has announced a third attempt at creating humanitarian corridors, a ceasefire. We've had 2 ceasefires over the last few days. They don't last. Hopefully this one will, but I'm not optimistic that it will. You wake up in America today where gas prices are the highest that they have been in 15 years, since 2008. And gas industry analysts expect that those prices will go even higher. And why would they not? Because yesterday, the price of oil skyrocketed to $130 per barrel. Now, if you're going $130 a barrel, I would like to have a frame of reference as to what oil was, say, before Russia invaded Ukraine. Well, in December, not that long ago, remember Christmas, December, end of the year, oil was $65 a barrel. Of course, the Biden administration would love you to believe that this is all Vladimir Putin driven, all the fault of his invasion of Ukraine. But of course, you're smart. You're a Hugh Hewitt show listener. You know better. You know that it is also a factor of the hatred that the Biden administration has for fossil fuels, for anything that would offend the green energy enthusiasts out there. And that this has been not just driven by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but it has been driven by virtually the first stroke of Joe Biden's pen on his first day in office when he canceled the Keystone XL pipeline and sent an unmistakable message printed in neon that this administration would ravage the pocketbooks of everyday Americans who need gas to get to work, take their kids to soccer games, live some semblance of a life that they themselves order. I'd like to go here. I'd like to go there. The Democrats would love to keep you from doing that, either with mask mandates, vaccine mandates, restricting your activities, or if they can't get you to bend to their will, then we'll just get gas prices to go through the roof, and you won't be able to afford it. Joe Biden says he has not raised taxes or will not raise taxes on Americans making less than $400,000 a year. I am one of those Americans, and I believe he has raised my taxes every time I fill my tank. I'm paying about $30 more for one of my vehicles, about $40 more for another, and about $40 more for a third. Yes, I know it's very non-carbon friendly of me to have 3 vehicles. We have 3 drivers in the family, though, and we all have places we have to go, like jobs, in order to keep up. So we have a lot of headlines today. Ukraine, just incredibly touching and heart-wrenching images out of Ukraine of a bridge being blown up by a Russian bomb with a mom and 2 children on that bridge. A train station overrun with people trying to flee for their safety. Soldiers carrying babies. This is a horrendous situation. Of course, was the main topic of the Sunday news shows yesterday. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan. Now, this is a very interesting approach. We, of course, can't do anything to make Vladimir Putin mad, because if we make him mad, then World War III might start. I would argue that it seems like it's already in process, particularly if Vladimir Putin gets Ukraine. What is to stop him from taking Latvia or Estonia or any of the other former portions of the USSR, the Soviet Union, that he would dearly love to put back together so that he could have the legacy of being the guy who reunited the Soviet Union. But let's pause for the moment on the debate of who would start World War III. Antony Blinken talking to Margaret Brennan saying that we can't establish a no-fly zone, and we don't want Vladimir Putin to think that we're shooting down his planes, so we would like Poland to send planes, and then we will send planes to Poland, and Vladimir Putin will not be able to figure out that we were behind the planes that may be doing what our planes dare not do. Here's Anthony Blinken with Margaret Brennan.
No, that gets a green light. In fact, we're talking with our Polish friends right now about what we might be able to do to backfill their needs if, in fact, they choose to provide these fighter jets to the Ukrainians. What could we do? How can we help to make sure that they get something to backfill the planes that they're handing over to the Ukrainians? We're in very active discussions with them about that. Look, I've been in Europe for the last couple of days working closely, as always, with our allies and partners at NATO, the European Union, the G7 countries, and all of us together are continuing to take steps to increase the pressure on Russia through additional sanctions, all of which are very actively under discussion and will be implemented in the coming days, as well as taking further steps to give the Ukrainians what they need to defend themselves against the Russian aggression.
Oh, yes. Tony Blinken has been in Budapest, and he is back, and he has, as he said, really been working with people to try to put the squeeze on Vladimir Putin and his inroads into Ukraine. Reuters reported on Friday that we are close to brokering a new deal. What? Well, can't say new. We are close to reinstituting an old deal. Remember the JCPOA, also known as the Iran nuclear deal. Obama sent pallets of cash to Iran so that they could pursue but never reach nuclear capabilities. Okay. And Donald Trump said, probably a bad idea for Iran to have a nuclear weapon since they're pretty straightforward in their desire to blow Israel off the map. I'm going to cancel that. Of course, anything that Donald Trump did, Joe Biden must undo. So if Donald Trump undid the JCPOA, then Joe Biden must reinstitute it. And at this particular time, it just so happens, as our gas prices skyrocket and set the stage for a Democratic bloodbath in the midterm elections, it would be really wonderful if, in the eyes of the Biden administration at least, Iran would start to produce more oil. And so we are close, Reuters says, to getting Iran to produce more oil. Do you think they'd do that out of the goodness of their heart? I'm guessing no. They might want something for that. And what might they want? They might want the reinstitution of the JCPOA. Except Iran just, I don't know, they're funny this way. They don't like sitting down at the table with us. So we need a third party, according to Reuters, to kind of make this happen. And I know you think I'm putting you on here. Who would be a third party that Iran would be willing to have at the table in order to translate or facilitate a discussion with the United States of America so that the JCPOA could be reinstituted? So we can't strike a new deal with Iran because if we strike a new deal, there's this problematic matter of you have to run it by those busybodies in Congress. And you know those Republicans in Congress are probably going to frown upon a deal with Iran in order to get more oil. So Joe Biden says it's not a new deal with Iran. It is an old deal. We're just reinstituting it. It's already been approved. You don't have to get my approval. But who could broker such a deal? I know he's busy at the moment, but that someone would be Vladimir Putin or his underlings. Yes, I know. It's odd, isn't it? We're going to backfill planes, according to Tony Blinken, with Poland. Poland's going to send planes to Ukraine. Putin won't figure that out. We are also at the same time trying to get a new deal with Iran for more oil so our oil prices and gas prices can go down, and we're going to ask Putin to help us do that. It's all very weird, But it gets weirder, and we'll tell you how much weirder next on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Studios of 98.9 The Answer in Columbus, Ohio, and the reports this morning are that Russia has announced a third attempt at creating humanitarian corridors in the Ukraine. Of course, the previous two have been violated, and so we can hope, but certainly does not appear that that is something that will occur with any great certainty. I am pleased to be joined right now by Salena Zito, and you can find her work, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, also New York Post, and, of course, Washington Examiner. And, Salena, I appreciate the time this morning. Thank you very much. You've written a very interesting story about Coca-Cola and noting Coca-Cola's objection to the Georgia voting rights bill, or the voting security bill, I guess, in Georgia, and how Coca-Cola got very, very upset about that and yet still continues to do business, big business, in Russia. Tell us a little bit about that and what's your view of American companies continuing to do extremely lucrative commerce in Russia is at this point in time as they are invading Ukraine.
Well, good morning, Bruce. Thanks so much for having me on. So, back in, what was last year? It feels like 300 years ago, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
Last year, when the voting law was passed, a series of corporations, I'm sure people remember Major League Baseball pulling the All-Star game out of Atlanta, and Delta also making comments about, and I can't remember if they did anything other than to, yap about it.
Yes.
But Coca-Cola joined in. Coca-Cola is based in Atlanta, and they condemned it. And they didn't just condemn it. It was something they went on a string on Twitter. They went on the international news. They went on cable news, network news, and they really made a stink about it and how awful it was. What I found incredibly interesting is that Coca-Cola, I think it's their second largest market in the world, is Russia. And people don't just buy Coca-Cola in Russia; they make Coca-Cola in Russia, and they employ 7,000 people in Russia. Now, you would think, immediately went to Twitter, and surely they are outraged that what they're doing in Ukraine. Nothing.
Yeah.
There hasn't been a statement. There hasn't been a tweet. There hasn't been a pullback their production there, which a lot of U.S. companies have done. There has been none of that sort of response to watching another country being taken over, and people murdered, people killed right before our eyes. And it just goes to show that this corporate social activism is just a pose.
No doubt about it.
They don't want to do anything has consequence. They just want to be able to make their activist shareholders happy.
Salena Zito is our guest. You can find her fine work in the Washington Examiner, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, New York Post on her website, Salena, Salena, Zito, Zito, SalenaZito.com. We expect the Biden administration to bear a huge cost in the midterm elections, but this kind of phenomenon you're talking about, wokeness in American corporations, do you think American consumers, conservative consumers, have caught up to this, will catch up to this going forward?
Absolutely. This is our sort of distancing ourselves from what I always call our corporate or our cultural curators began happening way back in 2006. What are cultural curators? Those are the people that are in charge of mostly everything that we see, do, feel, hear, etc. in corporations, but also institutions, academia, our sports entities, our national media. And the problem is the people that run this live in the super zip codes in this world, and they don't have interaction with people that live 15 minutes out of every city in this country. You know how different things are 15 minutes outside of the city of Columbus.
Absolutely.
It's a completely different world. And that is why you see the country becoming more and more center-right, because they have they have nothing in common with the people that are making these decisions. So not only are we not buying their products, you see the decline in all kinds of things. Just look at the NFL and how their numbers have dropped.
Yeah,
but we also and it's caused our politics to move center right. We saw in 2020, while Joe Biden won in my state of Pennsylvania, down ballot, those seats became more and more Republican. The same for in Ohio, the seats became more and more Republican. And it's not because Republicans are doing anything particularly wonderful to draw voters over there. It's just that the Democrats are aligned with our cultural curators, and they do not feel as though they have anything in common with them.
Well, Salena, you do outstanding work. New York Post, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Washington Examiner. Catch her work at SalenaZito.com, including a very interesting story about J.D. Vance, the Senate candidate. We'll talk Ohio Senate with Mike Gibbons, the frontrunner, in the 8 o'clock hour. You are listening to the Hugh Hewitt Show from the ReliefFactor.com studios. I'm Bruce. ReliefFactor.com studios, in for Hugh Hewitt today on the Hugh Hewitt Show, originating from the studios of 98.9 The Answer in Columbus, Ohio. And you are waking up in an America where gas prices are the highest they have been per gallon since 2008. Gas nationally is over $4 per gallon. We will discuss this and other topics related to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and a war that continues to rage, even as Russia says for the third consecutive day that it will observe a ceasefire and will not impede refugees from leaving the cities and towns that they are attempting to evacuate. That, of course, has not happened in the previous two ceasefires, and in fact, it did not happen yesterday. Searing story today in the New York Times about a family, a mom, 2 kids, blown up on a bridge as a Russian bomb hit the bridge while they were trying to escape. You will find that story not only in the New York Times, but on the timeline of my next guest. He is Ben Domenech, publisher of The Federalist. It's my pleasure to welcome Ben to the show. And Ben, I was struck late last week in an appearance that you made on Special Report. You said what I thought was so insightful, and that is that we are in an era now where we see war happen in ways that we did not see it happen in the Vietnam War, in World War II. We saw a little bit of it happen during the Gulf War, but I think we're getting more pictures, more reporting on the ground. And you made the point that we are one picture away, one story away from it affecting us on an emotional level in ways that headlines don't impact us. And I wonder if you think this story in the New York Times is such a story, a mom, 2 children blown up by a Russian bomb.
I think that that's already happening right in front of us, and thank you for your kind words. I appreciate them. Look, the reality is that we live in a new environment when it comes to the immediacy of information. The imagery that is coming out of Ukraine is obviously jarring. It is something that is, for many Americans, I think, a very troublesome thing to see. And Americans are wrestling with the fact that they don't want to get sucked into an incredibly damaging and devastating European war, one that could impact a lot of our allies and certainly American soldiers and end up with them in harm's way. At the same time, I think that it is impossible to not feel the reaction to seeing this kind of murder, this kind of just insidious and terrible activity on the part of the Russian government, and to not feel the need to react. Now, the problem is, of course, that for many of our political leaders, there is no clear reaction. They want to try to brush Putin back. They want to try to make this whole thing difficult for him and have him back off. But nothing that they've done to this point has changed his mind, his dedication to his goal, I believe, of recreating the Soviet map from prior to the end of the Cold War. And I think in this case, we have a very limited set of tools that we can use, but one that is right there for the taking that Joe Biden could use, and frankly, I hoped that in the State of the Union he would use, is America's own energy resources, resources that he has obviously stunted in service of his climate agenda and the befuddled and ridiculous, in my view, approach that they have used to climate and Green New Deal adjacent policy, let's put it that way. And instead of going back or questioning any of it in a way that obviously would have been bipartisan, would have gotten the approval of not just Joe Manchin, but I think of another slew of key Democrats who, come from energy-rich states who would like to see America use this tool in a direct economic way to push back against Russia's ability to sell its gas at inflated prices, which is funding this war. Instead, they have shown only dedication to this John Kerry-esque agenda, and I think it's madness. It's utter madness. It's just leaving the best tool that you have in your toolbox as opposed to taking it out. And that actually increases the likelihood that we end up being sucked into a hot conflict with Russia, because if you're not going to use that type of power, then eventually people's demands get enough to say, just stop it. Just do whatever you have to do to stop it. And unfortunately, you and I both know that means a much heavier use of American military might, which risks a number of other things on the international stage.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. We're speaking with Ben Domenech of the Federalist, publisher of the Federalist, and follow him on Twitter at bdomenech, Domenech. I think your point about the allegiance to the greenies is well taken, but we saw in Joe Biden's State of the Union address, Ben, it's not like he's unwilling to part from the leftist, the most left part of his wing with his, which was a lie, but his inane comment, fund the police, fund the police. We know Cori Bush, we know Jayapal, we know that AOC is not going to get on board with that. I think it's, I'm not a political strategist, but I think he could do far more good than harm to his party by doing what he needs to do, increasing domestic energy production to lower gas prices. If he's willing to part with them on funding the police, even though I don't really believe he believes that or will do that, why is he not willing to take them on energy? Because I think, again, the gains would far outweigh the losses.
Because the sins, I think, against the left are on two different levels. The climate agenda really is an aspect of religion for them. It is total dedication. They honestly believe in what they're doing and what they see as something that is morally unquestionable. And I think that as opposed to that, something like funding the police is essentially a new slogan. The defund effort is something that hasn't been around for that long and already has had some significant negative ramifications for blue cities and blue states in terms of the approach. People are not happy when they see that kind of immediate uptick in crime and in violence. And that's something that I think, a lot of smart Democrat consultants are saying, back off, back off, back off. You don't have that same feedback loop when it comes to the climate agenda. And I think because of that, you're ending up in a situation where the Biden administration, by dint of being so wedded to this, doesn't see their path forward, which I think is fairly obvious, which is to give the energy interests a short-term win, meaning, partner with Lisa Murkowski, Joe Manchin, et cetera, and basically say, what do you want to do when it comes to energy policy to increase domestic energy and to push back against Putin, and then give the green folks, what they want in terms of a long-term package. And that means obviously a bunch of fake green jobs and all sorts of things that would make you and I very upset, but would almost certainly pass the Congress. And do so, I think, with flying colors, and only have the strongest fiscal conservatives opposed to it. That's something that I think Ron Klain and the White House could do, but the fact that they're not doing it just shows you how dedicated they are to this agenda and how much it now drives what the Democrats do in ways that, as we see in Ukraine, are now having deadly ramifications.
Yes, Ben Domenech, our guest, publisher of The Federalist. Follow him on Twitter at bdomenech, Domenech. Your point's well made, and it shows to me, it underscores the fact they don't have control of their own party. They could call them into the White House. They could explain their strategy. They could tell them to silence it. They're not doing that because they know they can't control them. And you said, they can't take the win on what is a very doable policy, but I'm not surprised. You're not surprised they didn't take the win on Omicron. They could have opposed that as a less lethal variant, and we're winning this, and instead they had to magnify the danger of it. So, we have a lot of issues on the conservative side we can win on in November. We clearly have the southern border. We clearly have gas prices. They're going to continue to go up. What I'm curious about is we saw the phenomenon with Glenn Youngkin in Virginia and parents. That's an issue that Republicans can win on too. And I see a potential for a win, but also a potential for an inarticulate argument to be made on the conservative side for this indoctrination in our schools of transgenderism, SEL, social emotional learning. We're going to see this play out on the national stage with this swimmer from Penn University, Leah Thomas, who is a biological male. Leah Thomas is going to dominate at the NCAA championships in swimming. This is an issue that I think is extremely unpopular, not just with conservatives, but I think across the board. But I wonder, do you believe that Republicans are articulate enough to make this case against why this is damaging to a lot of causes that leftists have embraced over the years? Title IX, opportunities for women, war on women. Can Republicans make this case eloquently enough in a way that it will not bounce back on them as being hateful toward the person, not toward the agenda?
I think that's a big question, and I don't know that we know the answer to it yet. I think we're going to have to go through this cycle and see how it plays out. But I think you're focusing on the right thing, which is that the fear of being hateful toward the person is going to make a lot of Republicans change the way they talk about this in ways that I think will unfortunately lead to them not necessarily leaning into this issue as heavily as they ought to. Look, it's a radicalizing experience. If you are the father of daughters, and you see them, swim and go up and do their best to make it all the way to the top tier of their sport, only to have their experience brushed back by someone who's a biological male and who certainly was not winning or performing at the highest level prior to this supposed transition, then you end up in a situation where I think you just respond to this, regardless of whether you're a Democrat or Republican, with total distaste, dissatisfied with what's gone on, dissatisfied with the fact that everybody's sort of playing pretend, and frustration that the system isn't protecting your girls. In this situation, though, I think that Republicans need to not make the mistake of running away from the issue. Glenn Youngkin showed, I think, time and again that leaning into these controversial issues, leaning into the culture war conversation, was not something that hurt him. In fact, it helped him significantly. He went from being a more generic Republican candidate to being somebody who was a champion of a number of different issues, and he did so by being very definitive about the direction that Virginia schools would take, not just when it came to, CRT and controversial issues like that, but with regard to masking and reopening and taking on the teachers' unions directly. That's something that I think every Republican should be interested in doing. They should focus on it, and it will make a difference in November.
I think you're exactly right. I so much appreciate your work and your perspective that you bring to the Federalist and to Special Report. Ben Domenech, read him on his Twitter feed, @BDomenech. I'm Bruce Hooley, and you are listening to the Hugh Hewitt Show from the Relief Factor. To take the baton from an Ohio guy, and I am coming to you from the ReliefFactor.com studios of 98.9 The Answer in Columbus, Ohio, where we have a spirited Senate race on the Republican side of the aisle to succeed Rob Portman, and we will introduce you to one of those candidates, another Ohio guy, very shortly here on the Hugh Hewitt Show. The headlines today, of course, not good. Gas per gallon, highest price on average in the United States since 2008. And gas industry analysts say it's going higher to record levels. Of course it is. It hopped about 20 cents per gallon per day last week. Where will it go? Nobody knows. We have yet to have an administrative decision in Washington to ban Russian gas and oil imports. Oil fuels the Russian war machine, which is enacting disastrous casualties on civilians in Russia. But don't worry, Russia says they will allow for humanitarian corridors for civilians to escape. Of course, they said that Saturday, they said that Sunday, and they continue to lob bombs at Ukraine and blow up women and children. Can it get worse? Yes, it can. China this morning is touting its friendship with Russia as its most important strategic partner, which I'm sure will come as very disappointing news to Hunter Biden for all of his efforts to bring us closer to Chairman Xi Jinping in China. And Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is urging a global boycott of Russian products if the war continues. It will continue. Putin is not going to stop until he gets what he wants in Ukraine. And thanks to the bravery and courage and valor of the Ukrainians, he has not gotten it yet. Oh, by the way, Russia has skipped appearing in court in the Netherlands. An international court of justice was supposed to hold them, or at least hold a hearing today where they were expected to find Russia, I don't know what, in contempt for going into Ukraine. Yeah, that's a slap on the wrist. It'll do nothing. And they showed their disdain for the international court by not showing up. So let's get to the Senate race in the state of Ohio, because there's a lot of conversation nationally about the midterms and the damage that will be done to the Biden administration by what we hope is a red wave in the fall in the House, in the Senate. Senate is a more ticklish matter. We have more Republican seats up for re-election than we do Democratic seats. And a guy who is hoping to become a first-term senator from the state of Ohio in November is Mike Gibbons. And Mike joins us now on the ReliefFactor.com hotline. And Mike first has to win the primary in the state of Ohio. And congratulations, I guess, are in order, Mike, because the latest polls that I have seen, not from a campaign, but from an independent group, have you on top in the state of Ohio with 22%. Josh Mandel behind you at 15%. But my guess is with that large chunk of undecideds, you're not relaxing. You're continuing to get after it on the campaign trail in Ohio.
You're exactly right, Bruce. Good morning. I use football metaphors in a lot of my commercials, and I don't believe in a prevent defense. and you being an Ohio football fan, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
No doubt about it. That's Hugh doesn't want to talk about prevent defenses. He would remember that 86 championship game where the prevent defense cost the Browns. But you are on top, but you're on top by a margin that is outside the margin of error, but the largest chunk of Ohioans are still undecided in the Republican primary. Why do you think that is, and what is your strategy to get them from undecided to decided for Mike Gibbons?
Well, first of all, I think it's typical to have a large undecided piece going even into election day, and people are confused. There's a lot of people running here, and and what we're doing is trying to introduce ourselves to more of those people every day.
Well, you can take the opportunity here to do that. Tell them about yourself. You're a Cleveland businessman. Every headline I see with you, Mike, says you have deep pockets and you're spending millions of dollars on your campaign. And I'm always amused by these kinds of headlines as if it's a bad thing to be a successful businessman in America.
Well, it does bother me, and it kind of sticks in my craw a bit. I was born in the inner city of Cleveland on the top of a double on West 77th Street. My dad was then we moved to Parma. I don't know if you know Parma, but Parma is actually the seventh biggest city in the state. And but if you know Parma, it wasn't like we had lots of country clubs or golf. In fact, there was only one golf course in the city. I didn't golf until I was 27 years old. So my dad was a high school teacher and a wrestling coach, and basically our family was about sports. I was fortunate enough to be pretty good academically and was able to get scholarships through school and learned about business. We didn't even know a businessman growing up, and I found the business of investment banking. And a few decades ago, I started a firm in Cleveland, Ohio, with a desk and a phone, and it's now grown to be one of the larger middle market firms in America. So I've been very fortunate. And people keep saying, "Oh, you're not raising money. You don't have support for the outside." Well, the reality is I'm raising plenty of money, but I didn't feel comfortable talking to all the big donors until now. Being an investment banker, I try to make my decisions on the basis of facts and return on investment, and I wasn't worth investing in until I could prove myself out, and I think I've done that now. So we're really picking up the pace on the fundraising.
Mike Gibbons is our guest. He's running for the Republican nomination for Senate in the state of Ohio. It is a crowded race, but according to the Hill Emerson College poll released last week, he is on top of that race with 22% of the vote. Josh Mandel, who has previously run for Senate, state of Ohio, former state treasurer in Ohio, has 15%. J.D. Vance, the author, Hillbilly Elegy, comes in at 8%. Jane Timken, former GOP party chair in Ohio, and Matt Dolan, a state senator from Ohio, at 6%. And you can find more about Mike on his website, gibbonsforohio.com, or on his Twitter site, Mike Gibbons OH. Mike, you have campaigned, and a lot of people have campaigned. Mandel, Timken, I don't know anybody except Matt Dolan who's not campaigning, that you are a candidate who appreciates the policies of Donald Trump, and you believe that our country would be better off getting back to that. What do you see that motivated you to run for Senate, and what do you see happening in our country now that, from your perspective, needs to be corrected?
Well, I've got 5 kids, Bruce, and the thing that originally instigated my thought was one of my sons. I mentioned our family's about sports, so I kind of raised my kids the same way. And we had no military in our family. We didn't have relatives that would, introduce that possible path in life to us when I was a kid, and my sons and daughters didn't either. I had one son that graduated from Georgia Tech with a degree in aerospace engineering, joined the Navy, is now a Navy pilot. And my wife and I went and visited him down in Pensacola, and I walked away from there thinking I had to do something. As I said, I started out with nothing, but for this great country, I wouldn't be where I am, and it's my chance to give back.
Mike, everybody in this field is seeking Donald Trump's endorsement. He has not endorsed yet. There have been some headline endorsements. Rob Portman has endorsed Jane Timken, and that brought a flood of kind of other politicos, Joni Ernst and some others who have endorsed Jane Timken. You have the endorsement of Rand Paul. Have you made any inroads toward getting Donald Trump's endorsement, and do you think the 45th president will endorse anyone in this race?
I don't know the answer to that question. I was Trump's finance co-chair, state of Ohio finance co-chair in 2016. I was as active as I've ever been in a campaign, and I did it because largely for the same kinds of reasons I'm looking at for running. I didn't like the direction of the country. I got tired of throwing stuff at my television, I guess, and I saw a guy that said he wanted to fix a lot of the things that I thought needed fixing, and sure enough, he did. I think right now with the Ukrainian situation, you can see that Biden basically, through his compliance with the left wing of his party, has put our country in a very dangerous position. We had, we were energy independent, and he came in and made sure he has the bully pulpit. When you're running an oil and gas company and they say we're going to get rid of oil and gas and we don't like you guys, and then you have some of his appointees saying they want to shut him down, people don't make investment.
Yeah, that's been a big time problem, and it certainly is showing up at the pump. We're seeing that every single day. Mike Gibbons, Senate candidate, Republican side of the aisle, state of Ohio. He's the leader in the polls right now. Gibbonsforohio.com, at Mike Gibbons OH on Twitter. I'm Bruce Hooley from the ReliefFactor.com studios, in for Hugh Hewitt on The Hugh Hewitt Show. Sitting in for Hugh Hewitt today on The Hugh Hewitt Show from the ReliefFactor.com studios. The war in Ukraine continues. There are hopes, of course, that Russia will observe the ceasefire that is announced a third straight day. So I don't know how much hope you should put in that, because if they honored it on the first day they announced it, well, they wouldn't have had to announce it on the second day or the third day. But that is where we are. Hope for a humanitarian corridor was dashed on days 1 and 2 of the Russian announced ceasefires because, of course, there are searing pictures out of Ukraine, particularly a story today in the New York Times, a woman and 2 children blown to their death on a bridge. This maybe, who knows, the picture that prompts the Biden administration to bring the full brunt of what it could do to sanction Russia, or maybe not, because it is, of course, trying to navigate this delicate balance between appearing to be very harsh on Russia, strictest sanctions ever, But what about gas and oil? Funding that Russian war machine? So far, no. But Antony Blinken is taking it under advisement, he said on one of the Sunday news shows yesterday, asking our European allies, would it be okay if we sanctioned Russian oil and gas? Yes, I know it's a nonsensical position to take, but let's discuss it further with one of my personal favorites. She is the editor-in-chief of the Federalist. You will find her on Twitter at MZ Hemingway. I'm, of course, talking about special report veteran MOLLIE Hemingway. And MOLLIE, thanks so much for your time this morning. Joining us, Antony Blinken yesterday, I thought, reflected weakness on his appearance on various Sunday news shows by saying that, yeah, we're thinking about it, we're talking about it, but we have to ask our European allies first if we can actually go ahead and sanction Russian gas and oil.
Well, the real weakness that we've seen is everything leading up to this decision by Putin to invade Ukraine. Our posture for decades, in general, with limited exceptions, has not been great in managing this conflict since the end of the Cold War. It is actually not bad to think prudently about what we're doing in terms of sanctions because there's so many second-order and third-order effects. That's where I don't think you're seeing Americans really thinking through what the long-term consequences are of some of these actions. And I think they're more concerned about appearing tough than actually thinking how to end this humanitarian disaster, how to end it quickly without risking literally nuclear war. And it doesn't seem like there are a lot of adults thinking through these very difficult issues.
What are some of the things that you see on the horizon, those ripples in the pond, if you will, that you don't think are being taken into account and that this administration and the decision makers don't have the foresight to see coming as a result of what they've already done?
So in general, I think that people should be thinking about what's in America's interest first and foremost, and rejecting some of these other approaches that seem to not care at all about what America's interests are in Russia's horrific decision to invade Ukraine and cause this unnecessary war. We're just seeing some of the same tired talking points without a sense that people understand the risks that are in play here. I mean, take even some of what we've done with sanctions and getting Russia off of the financial system.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. dollar being the reserve currency gives us a lot of power. It enables us to have a lot of debt. Moving everybody into a different system and making the U.S. dollar not so important is a very bad situation for us, even in the short term, but certainly in the long term. You see how some countries have not gone along with the West's approach to isolating and sanctioning Russia, which means that this increases the power of the Eastern blocs, China and India working with Russia on supply chains and a means out of some of the sanctions that we've put on them. We do not want Russia and China to be stronger. We don't want that alliance to grow stronger. It's already too strong, and we should be thinking through not just this particular horror that we're experiencing, but how much worse it truly could get.
MOLLIE Hemingway is our guest. She is the editor-in-chief of The Federalist, and you can find her thoughts and her content on her Twitter feed, which is at MZ Hemingway. I would highly encourage you to buy her latest book, which is Rigged, How the Media, Big Tech, and the Democrats Seized Our Elections. That's available everywhere that books are sold. MOLLIE, I don't know if you saw the headline this morning. The Chinese foreign minister has called Moscow, quote, the most important strategic partner to Beijing, says no matter how perilous the international landscape, we will maintain our strategic focus and promote the development of a comprehensive China-Russia partnership in the new era. So it certainly appears that China is prepared to backstop Russia, buying wheat, a lot of other things, to accomplish China's purpose, which is, of course, to hurt the United States. And I think we're all waiting to find out what China does with Taiwan, because certainly what we do with Russia and Ukraine, it may not be apples to apples, but it's certainly a template. What do you see happening on this stage, and maybe what should we have done to keep this partnership between China and Russia from growing as strong as it appears to be growing?
This entire debacle couldn't be happening at a better time for China as it continues its Cold War with us. And you think back to Kissinger and how he talked about the importance of triangulating the relationship between the Soviet Union, China, and us. That was part of why Nixon got closer to China, was to constrain the Soviet Union. And now it seems that China and Russia are understanding that and working that against us. But it also brings to mind, we're doing all this against Russia. Meanwhile, China has been eating our lunch in many ways, becoming more dominant on the global stage for decades. And U.S. companies and our government and other Western governments have not been willing to do what they need to do to keep China from dominating. And then, just playing right into their hands of getting distracted from our need to keep China as the primary focus of our national interest-based foreign policy by what's happening here with Russia and Ukraine is just sort of par for the course for us. This is what I'm talking about when I'm saying, we're looking at what we can do in the short term to prevent what Putin is doing in Ukraine. And we should be thinking very wisely about it and how it relates to our entire strategy and how our entire strategy really needs to be more focused on China.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you. I just think that, in order to be wise, you have to understand the problem. And I'm never honestly sure whether the Biden administration is incompetent or just, has a much different agenda than I do, which is for America to prosper and to maintain its position of strength. I hearken back to something Joe Biden said in Iowa in 2019, where he basically downplayed China. He said they're not even competition for us. They're small. So I don't know. Do they really understand what they are dealing with here? And if not, what hope do we have that they can possibly get their arms around it?
Well, and keep in mind, we just went through that 4-year term where we were told that the Trump family, which was known to be a global business family, had all these compromising ties with other countries. Meanwhile, the Hunter Biden and the Biden family business is totally entangled with China. You had Chinese communist-owned groups working with the Biden family on massive deals, and we're not even talking about whether that relates to why Biden is not willing to do anything intense against China. And then it's just hard to take him seriously at all when day one was to weaken our energy production, to harm our energy production. There's no way you can be serious going against Russia, which is not just an energy base. It has other things that we should be mindful of as well. But when we can't take it seriously, any effort to go against them, when we are crippling our own energy supply.
MOLLIE Hemingway is our guest. She's the editor-in-chief of the Federalist. Find her on Twitter at MZ Hemingway. There's so many familiar faces in the Biden administration. Jake Sullivan, Susan Rice, on and on and on and on. Obama famously said in his presidential debate with Mitt Romney, the 80s, want their foreign policy back. He posed China as the threat. Then Biden comes in. We talked about the comment in Iowa that China's not really a threat. Do you see, MOLLIE, any difference in how these people who are advising Biden and have positions of influence in his cabinet and in his administration, have they gained any clarity here on what the threat is to America, or are they just unrepentant, blind idealists who are going to plow through no matter whether world events confirm their view of how things should be or not?
I am just shocked at the level of incompetence that we're seeing, even as the world is on the brink of what could be a world war with nuclear implications. I almost wish they were more ideological rather than just the incompetence that we're seeing. But you're also seeing it's not just the Biden administration. I think a lot of people on the outliers of the Biden administration, in the think tanks, in corporate media, are not being serious right now about what a fraught situation this is. And they are amping up calls for things that could quickly lead to war. You mentioned Blinken on the show yesterday and him talking about fortifying Poland if Poland decides to enter the conflict. I mean, this is not something that should be talked about lightly, because this is the type of thing that leads to actual world war. And that is not a pretty thing, and I think people can kind of romanticize this. This is a serious disaster we're facing, and people should be doing everything in their power to end it as quickly as possible, as peacefully as possible. We should be thinking off-ramps for everybody, so that, because this is not a good moment, never a good moment to fight a world war, but this is particularly not a good moment for us to be involved in a world war, given our economy and given what we're dealing with domestically.
Mollie, I appreciate your perspective, and I really thank you for joining us today. Mollie Hemingway, follow her on Twitter at MZ Hemingway. She is the editor-in-chief of the Federalist. And to her point, the Biden administration thought that if it disclosed all the intelligence that it had about what Russia was doing, that would retard Russia from doing what it's already done. At some point in time, maybe you change strategy here and don't necessarily advertise that you're backstopping Poland if they send planes. Maybe it'd be a good idea to keep what you're going to do secret from Vladimir Putin before you do it. I'm Bruce Hooley, in for Hugh Hewitt in ReliefFactor.com studios.